Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down the full card for UFC Fight Night, Holloway versus Rodriguez. And we do have a pretty decent card, all things considered. Usually these Fight Night cards that come after these numbered cards usually, are a little flat, but I do think this card's got a few exciting fights on here. A lot of prospects, I think, on here as well. But yeah, should be a pretty exciting card, but it's going to be hard to top this card that we're just coming off of UFC 268. The main card was just absolute fireworks, from beginning to start. Probably one of the best main cards on the year. So let's get right into the recaps. I know some of the previous ones have been going a little long, so I'll try and run through this, not have them be as long as some of the other ones. So kicking off the card, we had CJ Vergara, Ode Osbourne. I did take Osbourne to win, did put him in a parlay. Unfortunately, the second leg of the parlay didn't cash, but ultimately I did feel that Osbourne, a little more proven at the UFC level, a little bit better on the feet, a little quicker, a little more dynamic with the striking. And, he definitely showed that. He was slowing down a little bit, but I do think that he banked 2 rounds pretty solidly there. And then moving along, Melsik Bagdasaryan, Bruno Souza. I did end up putting Bagdasaryan in a parlay as well. Didn't do a breakdown for this fight, I don't think, since I think it was announced after I had released the podcast, but, I did some tape on that afterwards. And yeah, it just looked like Bagdasaryan was the better striker all around. Souza, I didn't think he looked particularly great. And Bagdasaryan, I think did win 2 rounds as well, pretty convincingly. So, yeah, I think he was the side there for sure. But again, the other leg of that parlay did not cash as well, which I'll go over when we do get to that fight. But moving along, Dustin Jacoby, John Allen. So the original matchup fell through. Dustin Jacoby came in short notice. Wasn't able to really do tape on this fight, but, I did think Jacoby would win. He was just the far superior striker. And, it didn't look like Allen really was in that fight at all. But yeah, moving along, Jean Vellante, Chris Barnett, pretty weird fight. Not one I really had action on, but, I can't say I didn't call it, because if you go back to my podcast from last week about this event, I did say that Barnett would win via a spinning wheel kick, but, I was half joking when I said that, but, just kind of funny to see it actually play out. Ian Gary, Jordan Williams. So yeah, I took a small shot on Jordan Williams, thinking that, Gary, while he has looked solid on the regionals, was against relatively low-level fighters. Him making his UFC debut, massive favorite, coming over to the States. And Williams being, I'd say, a, pretty aggressive striker, would give Gary some troubles. And, for a good chunk of that fight, he did until he got caught, right? So, the chin of Williams definitely, I think, a liability at this point. At least at this weight class, I think the weight cut might be getting to him. He hasn't really shown many issues prior to his cut down in this weight class. So this is, I think, the second fight in a row he's been dropped for sure. So, it's going to be tough betting Williams here, but I don't know if they'll keep him around. And as for Ian Gary, I do think the guy, he does have potential, but, we did see him struggle a bit against, an aggressive pressure striker like Williams. And going forward against these matchups, I might be looking to fade him again, but I don't know how many of these matchups he'll be getting going forward. Gary, I think, is a really well-rounded fighter. So fighting someone who, isn't as dangerous on the feet, I do think that Gary should do well in those matchups, but against pressure fighters like Williams, I do think he might struggle a bit going forward. That said, though, he's very young, could make a lot of improvements going forward anyways. But moving along, Edmund Shabazian, Nasruddin Imavov. Didn't really have much action on this fight. Did take Imavov to win in round 3. I did say that Shabazian, he is a gasser, is someone who will slow down. And this was a fight that came real close to getting finished in the 3rd round, because had Imavov not gotten into that crucifix position late in the 2nd round, I do think that it squeaks to the 3rd round, in which case I do think Imavov likely finishes Shabazian there. So not too upset about that bet. It was only a small poke, and came very, very close to cashing. But moving along, Phil Hawes, Chris Curtis. Another fight where I took Curtis to win via round 3. I like taking these round 3 props against guys who slow down, because I think those fighters are more likely to get finished late in the fight than your usual fighters. So, kind of weird how the fight played out. Hawes definitely looked like he was winning most of these striking exchanges until Chris was able to just land a pretty flush shot to the chin of Hawes there. Or it looked like it might have hit his nose or something. It looked kind of weird, honestly, but Yeah, Curtis was able to just get the knockout there. The chin of Haas, very big concern at this point. I think he's been hurt. He's been wobbled in pretty much all of his fights, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to go to his wrestling this fight. I think that his chin might have been a little too compromised because, he got touched and then it just fell to his face, so wasn't able to get on that single. So Curtis wins there. Wasn't able to cash my round 3 bet. But, again, very small shot there. And then Ally Quinta, Bobby Green. So this was the fight that kind of screwed me over the most. I had the fight goes the distance, and then I also had Green to win via decision. I wasn't expecting Ally Quinta to be, this washed, honestly. And Green, historically, he's been a decisionator, hadn't gotten a finish in years. Quinta's been super durable for most of his career, but I guess the 2-year layoff really kind of fucked him. He looked kind of bad in there. And then I think his durability might have not been great in there as well. And then it looked like Quinta kind of just wanted out anyways. Like, he kind of just shelled up after he had gotten dropped instead of looking to continue to defend himself, which some fighters do. Some fighters, they'll just look for a way out. And it looked like Quinta wanted out. Really unfortunate that happened. I had a lot invested in the fight, going the distance. But it is what it is, and we move on. Alex Pereira, Andreas Michailidis didn't really have any action on this fight. I did figure if Pereira were to win, it'd likely be by knockout or KO, TKO, and then with Michailidis, he'd have to grind out a decision. Just to fight that, a little too high variance for me to partake in. But moving along, we're at the main card now. Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler. So, very, very great fight. Probably fight of the year. Had a lot of back and forth moments. Gaethje was hurt early in the fight, and then Chandler got dropped in the second round. Lots of crazy exchanges. Very exciting fight. Very fun to watch overall. Was a little surprised nobody got finished in that fight. I did take the fight, doesn't go the distance. Had that parlayed up. Obviously, that didn't cash, but, can't be too upset about that. This was probably one of the best fights, or the best fight of the year. I just thought that, with Chandler, he's live to finish anyone early in the fight. And then I just thought that had the fight get extended, Chandler be a little too tired, and then the attritional damage of Gaethje would start to add up. But both guys showed phenomenal durability. Gaethje, not so surprised. The guy's has had a cast iron chin so far in his career. And then with Chandler, he actually showed a good amount of durability as well. I thought that, with the amount of finishes that Chandler's gotten, or the amount of times that Chandler has been finished, his chin might be a bit compromised, especially against a heavy hitter, an attritional fighter like Gaethje. So, a little surprised it did go the distance. That said, though, I do think that there was a decent chance that the fight would get stopped when Chandler got dropped. He was able to get in on the single, but Gaethje was hammering him with some hammer fists, and any other ref probably would have stopped that fight, but can't be too upset, honestly. It was a very fun fight. But moving along, Shane Burgos, Billy Quarantillo. So, I went pretty heavy on Burgos here. Really happy he cashed. Kind of saved the night, honestly. Kind of played out the way I expected. Billy Q put up a good fight there. I thought that Burgos, he'd be able to keep the fight standing. He'd be just the much better striker on the feet. And I think outside of that first round, Burgos really was able to get his offense going. And I think when the latter 2 rounds very convincingly, you can look back at this in hindsight and say that, minus 190, minus 200, probably not the value side here. But I think Burgos wins most of those fights by pretty decent margin there, at least going into the second and third round. Burgos, able to match the output and cardio that Quarantillo brings to the table. But, where I think Burgos really did excel was in the striking, where, I thought he had a pretty big edge. So, not much more to say there. I did think that he might get the finish in the third round just based off of attritional damage, but Quarantillo just showed next level toughness. Kind of unfortunate this went after the Gaethje fight because, on any other fight night card, both guys would have gotten a bonus. Really sad that they didn't there because that fight was a banger, honestly. But moving along, Frankie Edgar, Marlon Vera. Didn't end up taking a half unit shot on Edgar to win via decision. I just felt that with how, I guess, deficient Vera was on the ground, that Edgar might be able to get a bit of top time, maybe grind out, 2 of the 3 rounds, because Vera, he does start slow, and he did drop that first round. Should Edgar had, gotten a bit more top time maybe in the second round or so, he probably could have squeaked by, 29-28 sort of decision. But, of course, the concern coming into this fight was that Edgar's chin might be shot. And it looked like Vera, anytime he was touching Edgar, he's responding big to it. And eventually he did find that head kick. So, yeah, really unfortunate for Edgar. It does look like, his days are numbered. I don't know if he's going to want to keep fighting. His chin, I think it's gone at this point. It's, he's been knocked out, I think, in like 4 of his last 5 losses. So they're going to have to give him someone like really, really easy for him to win now. Cause I don't think he's going to be surviving to the decision, against anyone with a bit of power at this point. So really, really sad to see, honestly. You never want to see a vet, a legend like that just get put out so many times. But it's just part of the game at this point. But moving along, Rose Namajunas, Zhang Weili. So I did end up taking a shot on Weili. While I felt that Rose was probably the more technical striker at distance, I thought that Weili would be able to, get her grappling, her clinch work going, really work the kicking game, limit the movement of Rose a little bit. So I ended up taking a small shot on her last minute. Obviously that didn't pan out, but yeah, look, I'm going to be a little biased here, obviously, because, I did have some stakes in this fight, but I did feel that Weili probably did enough the first 3 rounds to win those rounds. And then, I felt she did drop the last 2 rounds. I felt maybe the second round was probably the most contentious of the first 3. I do think that Weili won 1 and 3, I think, pretty clearly. The second round was, I think, the swing round. So yeah, not too much to add there. That 5th round, if Weili had shot the takedown, maybe it'd go a little differently. But, overall it did look like maybe she was a little more tentative than usual. Like, after getting knocked out, she probably didn't want to overcommit on any of her shots, and led to her maybe not being as aggressive as she'd like. And, I think that was kind of a theme in both of the title fights, because in the Usman-Covington fight, I think that was definitely a dynamic that had a bit of an impact on how the fight played out. Because, yeah, I guess we'll just move along to the main event here, Usman Covington. So yeah, I did have a unit shot on Covington, and definitely may have put a little too much weight on how the first fight played out. Thinking that, it was close. This would probably be a close-ish matchup as well. And that Covington would likely be the value side. But, as it turns out, the mentality going into this fight was going to be definitely in favor of Usman there. So, well, obviously, the mentality, and then the fact that Usman, he is physically just the much more imposing fighter in there. But it definitely looked like Covington was a bit more tentative in that fight. He was a little more... he played it a little more safe. I think he respected the power of Usman a lot more going into this fight, as opposed to the first one, where he was able to swing a little more recklessly, make the fight a lot closer than how this second fight played out. Because I think the biggest dynamic between the two was that Covington going into this fight, he was a little more tentative of the power coming his way from Usman. Usman coming off of 2 highlight reel knockouts. I think Covington really respected that, on top of the fact that, he did actually get finished by Usman in that first fight. So definitely looked like Covington was respecting the power coming from Usman a lot more. And with Usman, it definitely looked like he was a little more loose in there, a little more confident in his power, coming off of, those 2 knockouts, of course. And then the fact that, he's taken Colby's best shots and wasn't respecting the power of Colby as much, right? He was able to really let his hands fly and just do a lot more damage on the feet. But yeah, Colby did end up taking the last 2 rounds, but I don't think that fight really was close at all. So yeah, congratulations to Usman and anyone who was on him. The guy's looking like an absolute monster in there. Easily just pound for pound one of the best fighters currently, and is making a really good case for being one of the greatest fighters of all time. Personally, I would like to see him get a few more title defenses in. But, his resume is looking phenomenal at this point. But yeah, that'll do it for this recap. So without further ado, let's get right into this fight night card. And in the next fight, we have Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Daun Jung. And Jung's the minus 145 favorite, come back on. Nzechukwu is plus 125. So we'll take a look at Nzechukwu first. He's a pretty interesting fighter. I feel I probably don't have the best read on him. He's a tall, lanky guy in there, primarily a striker. But I feel like in a lot of his fights, he's kind of just coasting in there until his opponents kind of gas out and he just ends up taking over. Like, I think we saw in his two most recent fights, Ulberg and Marquez, where, both of those guys kind of started off a bit strong. Kennedy didn't really do much for those early rounds and then was able to just turn it up. I think in the latter rounds, was able to start piecing up his opponents. They gassed out in there, and he was just able to get them out of there. So, I feel that offensively, Kennedy he's a pretty good striker. It's just that sometimes he has a habit of getting back down. He is a bit tentative early in the fight, but I feel when he starts to turn it on, he is pretty good offensively. It's just whether or not he's willing to move forward. If he's willing to engage, because a lot of the time I just see him, he gets backed up, he'll just shell up and let his opponents tee off on him. And, so far it's worked because they've gassed themselves out, but I feel against better fighters, that will pace himself a little better. He could find himself in a pretty big hole later in the fight and not actually be able to dig himself back out. But, I do feel that if he is a little more aggressive early, I do think that, he could have a lot of success. And really, that's just the issue that I have with him. But, outside of that, he's shown pretty good toughness. He's shown good durability, good recoverability, good cardio in there. The defensive grappling definitely does need a bit of work, but, he does fight hard to work his way back up. I do like Kennedy here, but again, really, it's just sometimes he is a little tentative. But taking a look at his opponent, Jung, I'd say Jung is kind of similar to Kennedy in the sense that, he is primarily a striker as well. Has shown that he could weather an early storm like he did against Cadiz, where, Cadiz kind of blew himself out there early, and Jung was able to start to turn it up, in the second and third round, eventually get Cadiz out of there. But, the one fight that really sticks with me for Jung is his fight against Alves, where, we see the best performance that Alves put on, like, in his last 6 fights. So, that's definitely a concern for me there. Alves, was kind of teeing off on Jung a little bit there. Jung was honestly, I think, kind of lucky to get that draw. I do think that Alves kind of edged it in that fight. But, as far as what Jung brings to the table here, he does have pretty good offensive boxing, but, he is kind of hittable. And outside of that Alves and that Cadiz fight, I don't think he's really shown too much because, he beats Mike Rodriguez in there, gets him out early, but I don't know if we really learned too much from that fight. And then his most recent fight was against William Knight, who, Jung was able to just take down repeatedly, same takedown over and over, just lay on top of Knight, and basically just coast to decision. So I don't know if we really learned too much from Jung there. I don't think we could really rate his wrestling highly, considering, William Knight would just showed absolutely no takedown defense, showed 0 get-ups. So, yeah, I don't know if we could really rate Jung's wrestling too highly after that performance. So, taking a look at this matchup, I feel that, when it comes to the striking, I actually might favor Kennedy a little bit more here. I think he's definitely the taller, rangier guy. I think he's a little better defensively as well. Really, it just comes down to whether or not he's going to throw volume, because when he does move forward, when he is attacking, I think he's very good in there. You just can't let Jung just tee off on him. So that is a little bit of a concern. But as a pure pick, I think I'm going to go with Kennedy here. I think that he's got a more varied attack. I think that he's probably a bit heavier hitter in there, and I do think his cardio and his durability is next level. So I'm going to go with Kennedy here. I think that, yeah, if he does, go on the offense a little more, I do think he could win a nice volume-based decision. And moving right along, we have Marc Diakiese versus Rafael Alves, and Alves is the minus 160 favorite. Come back on Diakiese's plus 140. So with Alves, we're getting a very explosive, very dynamic sort of fighter. He's got very powerful hooks and kicks. He is someone who will load up pretty big on his strikes. Just overall, a very dangerous striker on the feet. But, with that, he does expend a lot of energy, throwing those big power shots. So he is someone who will slow down, which definitely is going to be a concern going into all of his fights. But ultimately, I do feel that he is someone who is extremely dangerous and is live to finish pretty much any time in the fight. Because outside of his power on the feet, he does have really good jiu-jitsu. So, if the fight does go to the ground, I do think that he is live for the submission as well. The guy he's very big and strong. So, he could definitely look to just muscle his way into a submission should the fight find its way to the ground. However, the big thing with Alves is going to be the fact that, he will slow down. So, he is someone that, if you're able to kind of weather the storm, you might be able to potentially put him out late or just stall him out for a decision. I think that with Alves, the guy's, just a super high variance fighter. I think, with him, you could really get all sorts of outcome with him. So it's hard to get like a really good read on, what's going to happen in this fight, just because with Alves, really anything could happen. He could potentially get the finish early. He could get the finish late, or, he could get finished late, or, it could just go to a decision and, he looks kind of out of it in maybe the second half of the fight. But taking a look at his opponent, Diakiese, so the guy, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, still pretty young in his career, so could be making improvements. But from what I've seen so far, Diakiese does appear to primarily be a more striking dominant, but he does mix in the wrestling well, and I do feel that he does his best work when he's able to successfully grapple with his opponents. On the feet, he's got very heavy kicks. He likes to chop at the leg of his opponents. He's got pretty heavy hands as well, but it does look like he throws a lot of singular strikes. He does load up on some of those strikes. So those, could be a little telegraphed, could be something that can get read by his opponents. But like I said before, he does mix in the takedowns well. He isn't like super elite on the ground or anything, but he is someone who is, I think, decent at accumulating some control time, really just to look to secure rounds. He's not like a super top heavy or like grapple dominant opponent. He is someone who I think can keep it competitive on the feet and just look to cap off rounds with a bit of grappling. And if you look at most of his fights, he is someone who I think has the most success when he's able to do that. Because on the feet, he usually will get, I think, outclassed by just better strikers. We've seen him get beat by Fiziev, obviously, very talented prospect, and then Hack Perest as well, who's another solid striker in his own right. But still, these guys are, I'd say, still kind of green in the sense that they're more so just strikers. And, they were able to outstrike Diakiese, I'd say, by a pretty wide margin, keep the fight standing so that Diakiese isn't able to go to his wrestling. So, yeah, I do feel that at, this stage in his career, Diakiese's a bit more of a gatekeeper. Again, he is still young, but he could be making improvements. But overall, I do feel that we kind of know what level Diakiese's at. And, he's going to go out there and he's going to just completely expose guys who aren't UFC caliber, guys like, Sajewski, Frankie Perez, Timu Pakulin, guys who aren't really that great like anywhere. So he's able to kind of style on them a bit. But, he takes a slight step up in competition and, he kind of drops the ball. But, going into this fight, it's really tough to get a great read on because with Diakiese, we kind of know what we're getting with him, but the real tricky part of this fight is going to be Alves because the guy's just got, I think, a lot of upside, but he can completely drop the ball as well. Like Alves is someone who could come out there, and I do think that he's gotten opportunities to either just starch Diakiese or snatch up a sub. But at the same time, if he isn't able to do that, he can completely just gas out and either get finished in pretty devastating fashion, which, has happened quite often with Alves, or Diakiese could probably just maybe hit a few takedowns later in the fight and, just grind out a 29-28 decision. But as far as a pick for this fight, I think I'll just go with the more safe decision here in Diakiese. I think he's a little more proven at the UFC level. We kind of know what we're getting with him, so I guess I'll just take Diakiese here, thinking maybe he'll survive that first round and a half, and start to take over later in the fight. Diakiese, he's pretty durable. I don't think he's ever been finished by strikes. The guy took an absolute beating from Fiziev in his last fight. Granted, I don't think Fiziev's like a very dangerous, knockout sort of guy, whereas with Alves, he definitely does have one-punch power. But again, Diakiese has shown pretty good durability. The only time he's been finished is via submission, which was against Dan Hooker. Guy's a solid, top 10 level guy. So with Alves, the submission is live as well. But, ultimately, I think I'm just going to go with the more reliable pick in Diakiese here. But, I can't really blame anyone for taking a shot on Alves here. Especially at dog odds, I do think that Alves, he is live for a finish. And then, of course, I do think that he most likely will win the first round. If he is somehow able to win either the second or the third round, he could potentially squeak out a decision as well. So I don't mind a shot on Alves here, but again, at the end of the day with Alves, he's just way too high variance of a fighter for me to want to take a shot on him. But, plus 140, I don't think is a particularly bad price tag for what you're getting with him. So ultimately, I will side with Diakiese here. I do think he can either win a decision or potentially get a late stoppage. So, I'll go with Diakiese here. Moving along, we have Cortney Casey versus Liana Jojua, and Casey's the minus 210 favorite. Come back on. Jojua is plus 180. We'll start with the vet in Casey first. So, she is primarily a striker. She's got decent volume. Does seem to have a bit of pop in her shots as well. Does seem to have, decent footwork. Obviously, all relatively speaking here. I don't think she's that good of a fighter overall, but, compared to Jojua, I do think she's definitely a bit better, on the feet. But overall, I do think that Casey's a decent offensive striker, relatively speaking again. The only thing with Casey is she's got just terrible takedown defense. She's got poor hips, very poor balance in there. I think she's actually been taken down in almost all of her fights. I think there's maybe one or two fights that she hasn't been, but I'd say most of her fights she has been taken down at least once. And, off her back, she's not particularly good there either. Doesn't really have really good get-ups. Does seem a little lost down there. And I do think that's probably going to be the biggest concern going into this fight, against Jojua, who is primarily a grappler. On the feet, I don't think that Casey's got too much to be worried about. Jojua is a pretty terrible striker, honestly. Her offensive striking, extremely basic. Doesn't seem to have much power. Although, it definitely looked like she was landing a bit on Maverick. But, we do have to consider that Maverick, extremely young in her career. Also, she's a grappler as well. So, not a lot of striking defense from Maverick. And Jojua was able to land a few heavy strikes on Maverick. But, Maverick was landing at will on Jojua either, which, brings me to my next point. And that's Jojua doesn't really have any striking defense at all. Like, she's just extremely hittable on the feet. I think that Casey should be able to just light Jojua up. And I really don't think Casey's that good of a striker, but I do think she's got some pop in her shots. And, she has been somewhat competitive with other fighters in the UFC who, are definitely UFC caliber. Whereas with Jojua, I don't think Jojua's really UFC caliber at all. I mean, I don't think she's UFC caliber at all. Maybe if she gets a little better, maybe if she improves her wrestling and takedowns a little bit better, she could be possibly UFC caliber, but at this point, I just don't think she's that good. But like I was saying, Jojua is primarily a grappler. I believe that is her base, but I don't think her grappling's all that good. I'm looking at her record here, and she's got a decent amount of submissions, but it's on the regionals against some really low-level competition, and I honestly think that she should be winless in the UFC. Her only win in the UFC being against Belbita, who had a massive brain fart that fight, decided to clinch up, take the fight to the ground, where she had a massive disadvantage. I felt that if Belbita had just kept the fight standing, she'd have won pretty easily. And outside of that, Jojua has 2 losses, one to Maverick and then one to Sarah Morris, which, that's just such a bad look. I know it's up a weight class, but, she got reversed. She got taken down, got held down by Morris, just looked awful in that fight. But, you go ahead and look through the rest of Jojua's match record, and you see that, even on the regionals, she's just beaten these really low-level fighters, a bunch of cans, honestly. So, I really don't think Jojua is any good at all. I got to go with Casey in this spot here. I know Casey is 9-9, has not looked particularly great herself, but, I feel that Casey, she's at least fighting pretty competitively against UFC caliber competition, whereas Jojua, she's losing to like mid-level fighters, mid-low-level fighters, at the UFC level. And, she's beating really low-level fighters on the regional scene. So I really don't rate those highly whatsoever. But really just taking a look at this matchup stylistically, I think on the feet, Casey should be able to beat Jojua pretty easily. I think she'd just land at will on Jojua. Jojua's extremely hittable, doesn't move her head whatsoever. She's extremely telegraphed on the feet, and she's kind of slow, honestly. So I think that Casey's going to be able to get her reads pretty early, pretty quickly here, and just be able to tee off on Jojua. The only concern for Casey, obviously, is going to be the takedown defense. But again, I really don't think Jojua is that good of a wrestler. I mean, if she is able to somehow get this fight to the ground, she might be able to have a bit of success, but I really don't know how likely that is. Casey does have pretty subpar defensive grappling, but, it is subpar defensive grappling against UFC level competitors. Just going through a record real quick, JJ Aldrich, who, I'd say she is UFC caliber, but that was a really close fight, honestly. Cortney had, I don't think she actually got controlled that much that fight. She was actually doing a good job of working her way back up and then, landed some strikes on the feet. And then Jillian Robertson, I think one of the better grapplers in the division. Some of her other fights. Michelle Watterson, who, not a fantastic grappler, but someone who can grapple and, is a veteran at that point. And then Claudia Gadelha, definitely one of the better wrestlers in the division as well. So, yeah, look, Casey's getting out-wrestled by, I'd say UFC caliber opponents, and I just don't know if Jojua is at that level. So I got to go with Casey here. I do think that she should be able to do enough on the feet to win. Minus 200 definitely does feel a little steep, but I just feel that Jojua's path to victory here is just extremely limited, and I feel like this could potentially be a levels fight, even though Casey's 9-9. So I'm gonna go with Casey here. I think she wins via decision. Moving along, we have Collin Anglin versus Sean Woodson, and Woodson's the minus 260 favorite. Comeback on Anglin is plus 220. So we'll start with the underdog in England here first. So from what I've seen, the guy does look to be a pretty aggressive pressure fighter in there. It does look to primarily be a grappler. On the feet, I do think his striking is a bit limited. He will look to just throw big winging shots to close the distance, look to maybe clinch up with opponents, hold them up against the cage, and then maybe work the takedown from there. He is, I'd say, pretty persistent with the grappling. He is someone who is, I'd say, pretty consistent to go there. He has pretty good cardio from what I've seen. He's been able to wrestle and grapple for 3 hard rounds. His striking, again, pretty basic. And he is someone who I feel is kind of reliant to have to go to the wrestling to win. I don't think he's going to be winning too many fights, if it's 100% standing. And, this is a fight where he's definitely going to have to get his wrestling going, because on the feet, I do think his opponent Woodson is the much superior boxer. Woodson's movement in there's a little bit unorthodox. He's got good feints in there. He's got pretty sharp striking, good volume as well. It does look like he lacks a bit of power, though. The guy I don't think is particularly well muscled, but he is very accurate. He's got good timing. Just overall, very good boxing, albeit a little unorthodox. His takedown defense I think is decent, but I do think that it's largely contributed to his large frame. A lot of the times he's able to just opponents pick him up and he's able to just kind of land on his feet. His hips are pretty good too, so I think his takedown defense is solid, but his ground game, if you are able to take him down, does not look as good. He does look a little bit lost there, but the big thing is just going to be taking him down. But taking a look at this fight, I do definitely have to favor Woodson on the feet by a pretty wide margin. I think that if it's just standing, I do think that Woodson is going to be able to piece up Anglin. But I do feel there's a pretty decent path to victory here for Anglin if he goes to the wrestling. If he's able to take Woodson down, I do think he could probably get a good amount of control time. I don't know if he's going to submit Woodson here. I don't think that Anglin's a particularly high-level submission guy. I don't think he's actually got any submissions on his record. So, yeah, I think if Anglin is able to take Woodson down, he'll probably have to rely on maybe either pounding him out or just holding him down there and just getting a lot of control time. Overall, I do actually feel the line is pretty wide here. Anglin is actually coming off of a pretty nasty knockout to Bagdasaryan, but I don't think that Woodson is nearly as dangerous as Bagdasaryan is on the feet. Woodson is more of like a volume output guy, and Bagdasaryan's just extremely heavy hitter. He just punishes opponents on the feet, and Anglin wasn't able to get the takedowns, and Bagdasaryan was able to just basically just just tee off on him, do extreme amount of damage. Whereas if Anglin isn't able to shoot the takedown on Woodson, I think get a few more opportunities because I don't think that Woodson's going to be doing too much damage to Anglin, relatively speaking. So, I don't think that's going to deter Anglin as much as Bagdasaryan did. Anyways, back to what I was trying to say here. I do feel the line is wide because I feel that Anglin can definitely hit takedowns in the spot. I do think that Anglin can probably get some control time, can probably work a bit of ground and pound. So I'm going to side with Anglin here. I think that Anglin could have a decent chance of pulling off the upset here. Woodson has shown decent takedown defense, but it was against guys who I don't think have really good wrestling. His stats, I think, are a little overinflated, right, by, Kyle Bochniak and Zalal. Both of those guys shot, double-digit takedowns on them, was only able to get, one or two. So, I'm just going to run through the stats real quick. It does look like between Zalal and Bochniak, the guys were, 3 and 32 on the takedown. So, I do think Woodson's stats are a bit overinflated. We did see Terrence McKinney have, some wrestling, grappling success against Woodson until Woodson was just able to land that flying knee on him. So, I'd say outside of Woodson maybe landing a flying knee on Anglin, I do see Anglin having a decent amount of success with the wrestling, with the grappling. So, I'm going to pick Anglin here for the upset. I think that Anglin's just a much better wrestler than someone like Zalal, who I feel is pretty physically weak and overall just not really a good wrestler. The guy's, kind of exposed a little bit, but back to what I was saying with Anglin, I do think that Anglin's a better wrestler than Zalal and probably even better than Arosa. I don't know, but yeah, I'm gonna pick Anglin here. I think he gets it done via decision. And in the next fight, we have Miguel Baeza versus Khaos Williams, and Baeza is the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Williams is plus 130. So we'll start with Baeza first. The guy is primarily a striker. He definitely does have some jiu-jitsu, but all of his UFC fights have mainly played out on the feet. He does have that one submission win over Sato, but even most of that fight was on the feet. He's got a pretty good kicking game. Definitely one of these guys who is a little more kick-centric. He does have decent hands as well, but I do think that his game kind of does revolve around the kicks. I'd say the foundation of his offense. He's got good leg kicks. We'll look to mix it up and go to the head as well. And he is someone who will start to pour it on if he does sense blood in the water. And, he's coming off of an absolute war against Ponzinibbio, who a lot of people, including myself, kind of wrote off a little bit that fight. But, Baeza showed a lot of toughness, a lot of heart in that fight. He took that first round, but, Ponzinibbio was able to pull through the second and third rounds. But, Baeza, I think, gave a really good account of himself that fight. Definitely a fight that I think his stock kind of rose, even though he lost that fight. And he'll be going up against Khaos Williams, who is a pretty good striker in his own right. He's got very heavy hands. He's got good power, very explosive in there. He's, I'd say, a bit more of a counterpuncher. He's got good timing, very accurate in there. Just overall, I'd say a pretty good striker. He's pretty dangerous. And, I actually feel like Williams isn't super KO reliant. I do think that a lot of his win equity is, tied up in hitting those KOs, hitting those knockdowns. But, I do think that if it goes to decision, not all is lost. He fought really closely with Michel Pereira. And, I do think that he was ahead in the striking exchanges. Really, the only reason I think Pereira won was because Pereira was hitting those late takedowns in the fight. He wasn't even getting too much control time. I think he literally just hit a takedown with 30 seconds left. And I think the judges gave him that fight. But, that fight I think was a split decision. So it was extremely close. And then, he went to a decision with Semmelsberger in a fight that I do think that Williams won pretty clearly. I think two judges had, I think either the second or the third round for Williams, but I felt that Khaos probably could have won all three rounds there. And I definitely felt that Khaos was doing a lot more damage to that fight than Semmelsberger. So I do feel that Williams is a good striker. Obviously, he's got the KO upside, but I do think that should it go to a decision, he's got a decent chance of winning it. I don't think he's one of these knockout guys who are fucked if they go to decision. So, yeah, this is a pretty interesting matchup. I think it should be a pretty fun one, honestly. Both guys, I think, are pretty good strikers, but, they bring two different things to the table here. I think Williams is a little more, boxing heavy, whereas with Baeza, he mixes it up a lot better. He uses his kicks a lot better, a little more varied on the feet. But, overall, I think that Williams is going to be the heavier hitter. I think his hands are a bit quicker in there. I think that Williams is also a bit sharper in there. I think that Baeza is a little kick reliant for his offense. I do think that he's going to be getting off on those kicks against Williams, who does stand heavy on that lead leg. But Baeza, he does leave a lot of openings as well. I don't think that good defensively. We saw guys like Matt Brown, much older Matt Brown, and even Ponzinibbio have a lot of success just kind of teeing off on Baeza. Baeza, pretty damn hittable. He has shown good durability, but he was rocked by Matt Brown, and Ponzinibbio, I think, was doing a good amount of damage to Baeza as well. Obviously, Williams not really the level of striker as these guys, but those guys are, I think, a bit older, a little slower, and even they were able to find the mark on Baeza. So I feel that Williams likely will be able to touch Baeza up a bit, and for that reason, I do have to favor Williams here a bit more. I think that on the feet, Baeza might be landing a little more, doing a little more work, but I do think that Williams is going to be hitting just the much harder shots, the much cleaner shots. I think there's a chance that Williams might even get the knockout, if not, at least hurt Baeza enough, visibly on the scorecards, or visibly enough to the judges that they'll give him the rounds that way. Because I think that Williams can definitely drop Baeza, maybe wobble him, stun him a bit, even if he isn't able to get the knockout. And overall, I just feel that the judges, they'll grade, the striking of boxers a little more than just the kicks of someone who's, looking to kickbox in there. And, we kind of saw that happen in Baeza's fight against Ponzinibbio, where, Baeza, he was landing some pretty nasty leg kicks, and it did look like it was starting to affect Ponzinibbio, but Ponzinibbio was just head-ending in there the whole time. He was just, landing just flush shots to the chin of Baeza. His head would pop back a bit, and just, optics wise, it looks like, the judges definitely favor the boxing, the heavier hands, a lot more than, say, the varied kicking game of someone like Baeza. So I kind of like Williams in the spot. I feel that this fight should kind of be a pick'em. I don't see why Baeza's this big of a favorite. He's a moderate favorite, so he's not that big of a favorite, but I do feel this is a pretty even fight. It could go either way, and if anything, I do give the finishing upside to Williams, and I do think that Williams could potentially steal rounds with just big moments. The knockdowns, or either just being able to rock Baeza in there. So I'm gonna go with Williams, and I think I'll take him to win via decision. I don't know if he's going to put out Baeza. Baeza's shown really good durability and really good recoverability. So I do think he'll have enough big moments, and we'll do enough to win the decision here. And in the next fight, we have Andrea Lee versus Cynthia Calvillo. And Lee's the minus 125 favorite. Come back on Calvillo is plus 105. So we'll take a look at Lee first. Lee is primarily a striker. She is someone who can mix in the wrestling, as we've seen in her most recent fight, but generally she is a bit more of a volume striker. She does a decent job mixing it up. She's got a pretty high work rate as well. And again, she can definitely hit some offensive takedowns. But the big issue with her is going to be the defensive grappling. It's pretty bad, honestly. She's got pretty bad takedown defense, and then she does have a pretty bad habit of getting stuck off her back. And pretty much every single one of her opponents have been able to hit a takedown on her in all of her UFC fights, except for one, Antonina Shevchenko, who, she's got the worst grappling in the division, bar none. So Lee was able to take advantage of that, not giving Antonina any opportunities to hit any of her own offensive takedowns. But outside of that, Lee has been taken down by everyone. And I think that's going to be a pretty important stat here, considering she's going to be going up against Calvillo, who is a pretty well-rounded fighter. Nothing crazy on the feet, just serviceable striking, very meat and potatoes, not a lot of power, but, is someone who is, she's competitive there, but, I don't think that's really where she does her best work. With Calvillo, she's someone who I think, usually wins her fights when she's able to get the fight to the ground. The only issue is she's just not very reliable to go there. She's got good jiu-jitsu, and her wrestling is decent, but again, she isn't someone who will aggressively attack the wrestling. In fact, I do think she spends a little too much time sometimes on the feet just striking. And that definitely is a concern going into this fight as well, because I feel there is a very big path to victory here for Calvillo. But the issue is, like we've seen in some of her other fights, she just won't really go to the wrestling until, it's a little too late. Like, the Rodriguez fight, she was getting pieced up for a good round and a half, 2 rounds, before finally being able to hit a takedown. And then, fortunately pulling off a 10-8 in that round. But, had she not gone to the wrestling, it would have been a very easy win for Rodriguez there. But, it's just a little questionable that Calvillo didn't decide to attack the wrestling earlier in the fight. And then we kind of saw it again in the Chookagian fight where Calvillo didn't really commit to any of the takedowns. I know she got one really quick one early in the fight, but outside of that, she didn't really even try to get the fight to the ground. I know she shot a few takedowns, but they were pretty half-hearted. She wasn't really committing to them, didn't really attack those aggressively. And Chookagian pretty much was just touching Calvillo up on the feet. So I feel her decision-making is a little bit questionable in there. But as far as this matchup goes, I do feel she's got a pretty clear path to victory again. On the feet, I definitely do favor Leah a bit more. I think she's the more technical striker. I think she's a bit sharper in there. And she is going to be the larger girl in there. Calvillo is pretty undersized for 125. She's got more of a frame for 115, but, she's just not really disciplined, honestly. Is someone who I think can make 115, but just has routinely missed weight there. Was forced to move up. So, she's going to be pretty undersized here. I honestly think she's a little undersized for 115 as well. But, I think Lee does have all of the physical tools to do well in the striking department. But again, I do think that the path to victory for Calvillo will be the wrestling, the grappling, just because Lee has shown very terrible takedown defense. And if you are able to take her down, she will spend large chunks of the remainder of the round on the ground. So I think if Calvillo aggressively attacks the wrestling like she did against she could have some success here. But again, outside of that Jessica fight, Calvillo hasn't really had much success with the grappling at 125. So I'm a little cautious picking her here, but I think I am still going to side with her. Calvillo coming off of 2 losses now. I think her back's up against the wall a little bit here. I don't think she'll get cut if she loses this. The UFC's shown just a really long leash with some of these female fighters. We have Courtney Casey fighting on the same card here, who's, she's 9-9. So, I don't think they'll cut Calvillo if she loses, but, I don't think she wants to lose this. I don't want to lose 3 in a row. That's not a good look. And, at the end of the day, you do want to cash that second check as well. So, I think Calvillo, if she does attack a grapple-heavy game plan, she can have a lot of success. At evens, I am willing to take a small shot on Calvillo. I just think that if she does go to the grappling, she could be a much bigger favorite here. But, of course, she's not really reliable to go there. I am banking on her, doing that. So I'm going to side with Calvillo here. I think the striking, she can keep it competitive enough to the point where I think she should be able to set up her takedowns. In a prolonged striking exchange, I do think that Lee will win. But, again, I'm really banking on the wrestling and the grappling of Calvillo to pull through here. So I'm going to take Calvillo here, and I'll have her winning via decision. And in the next fight, we have Thiago Moisés versus Joel Alvarez. And Moisés is the -210 favorite come back on. Alvarez is +180. And it kind of seems a little weird for Moisés to be headlining a fight night card in his previous fight to now just being stuck on the prelims on a fight night card. But it definitely feels like maybe Moisés might have upset some higher ups or something, because the guy's gotten absolutely 0 easy fights since he's joined the UFC, right? He makes his UFC debut against Beneil Dariush. He gets matched up with Holloway, who, not a great fighter, but he is kind of seasoned in there. And, the guy's definitely a grinder. And he gets matched up with Ismagulov, Michael Johnson, another vet, Bobby Green, another vet, Alexander Hernandez, a somewhat hyped prospect at the time, and then Islam Makhachev. So, the guy's kind of been through the ringer, and now he's going up against Joel Alvarez, who, is, I think, a step down in competition, but Alvarez, I think, is a pretty decent prospect. So, Moisés has kind of had his work cut out for him so far. But taking a look at, what he brings to the table, I think the guy's extremely well-rounded. Obviously I do think that he excels in the jiu-jitsu, but, I think his striking's really started to come along. He's very meat and potatoes in there offensively, but, I do think he's making improvements. Defensively, I think he's solid as well. He's just been unfortunate enough to fight guys like Bobby Green and Michael Johnson like super early in his career. Two guys who I think are some of the, top 15 for sure, like in terms of striking at least in the division. Whereas, Moisés, he was only like 24, 25 during those fights. So, yeah, he's getting pieced up by these guys who have been boxing much longer against Moisés, who's essentially a grappler. But outside of that, he's, I'd say, fared pretty well against other fighters who are on a similar playing field in the sense that, we have Bobby Green and Johnson and even someone like Ismagulov, very seasoned in their striking. But, when he takes a bit of a step down against other guys, even Hernandez, who, everyone thought would just blow Moisés out of the water. Moisés looked really good in there. So, I do think his striking is coming along. I do think it's actually a little bit underrated. And, I think what really just sets Moisés apart is going to be his jiu-jitsu. The guy does have that as his base. He is primarily a grappler, but, he's really shown that his striking is starting to catch up a little bit. Although, he does have a bit of a ways to go, but, the fact that his progression in striking is coming along like it is, I think is very impressive. Overall, I do think that Moisés he's pretty underrated. He's been in there with some good guys. His style, not exactly the most fan-friendly, but, he is able to get wins in there. Sometimes it's a little controversial, but he is able to get it done. And just overall, I do think he's a decent prospect. I do think he'll hang around in the UFC for a bit. I don't know where his ceiling is at just yet. I would like to see him maybe start to, go to his jiu-jitsu a little bit more, but it does look like he's developing his striking pretty well. But, taking a look at his opponent, Joel Alvarez, like I was saying, another guy who's, I think, a pretty decent prospect. Alvarez does have his base in jiu-jitsu as well. He is primarily a grappler, but Alvarez definitely does seem pretty comfortable on the feet. He's very tall, very rangy in there. He's got nice straight punches, very good use of the kicks. So, offensively, I do think that he's looking pretty solid. Defensively, he is still kind of hittable. But that said, though, he is still extremely young. Similar to Moisés, he's going to be making improvements in there, and I do think that we are seeing improvements from him as well, right? It's not like he's in there just getting pieced up fight to fight and is really just leaning on his grappling. Although, I do think he's a very high level grappler, and I do think that his grappling is going to win him a lot of fights. But, for as far as this matchup goes, I really don't think that Alvarez is going to be able to take Moisés down and submit him. I think that Moisés is actually going to be the higher level grappler in there. I think what makes this fight interesting is going to be the striking. Like I said before, Moisés striking is coming along, but I think this will probably be the tallest, rangiest guy that Moisés has fought. So we don't really know how he's gonna match up with him, how he's gonna deal with the length. But with that said, I do feel that the striking of Alvarez is a little basic. I don't know how much success he'll have against Moisés, and I don't know if Moisés will maybe even look to grapple this fight. Like it kind of seems that Moisés really only resorts to the grappling when it gets a little dire in there, like he did against Bobby Green, Bobby Green, but mainly Michael Johnson. He just pulled that fucking heel hook out of his ass in that second round. But he did use the grappling a little bit against Bobby Green when he's getting pieced up a little bit. So yeah, I'm not sure if Moisés is going to go to the grappling here. I do think that it could definitely benefit him, but maybe he'll look to keep it standing. Two guys with good jiu-jitsu might just want to, trade on the feet. And if that does happen, I really don't know if Moisés is going to pay off that minus 200 price tag. I am picking him to win here, but I think that on the feet, it might actually play out a little close just because Moisés historically hasn't really run away with it as far as, just striking on the feet goes. He did beat Hernandez. I think it should have been 29-28. That first round was pretty close. I do think that Moisés won those last two rounds, but it was a pretty close fight, and Moisés was a pretty big dog in that fight. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if this fight does play out on the feet, I don't know if Moisés is going to look like a minus 200 favorite. I think it's going to play out pretty close, but I do think he should be able to edge it out. I think that, at this point, Moisés a much more proven commodity than than Alvarez. Although I do think Alvarez is pretty legit. But I'm going to go with Moisés here. I think he's going to be able to win a pretty close decision here. It won't look like, it won't look super dominant, I don't think. I'd be a little surprised if it was. But yeah, I'll go with Moisés to win via decision. Moving along, we have Roman Dolidze versus Daukaus, and Dolidze's actually stepping up short notice for this fight. Daukaus was supposed to have his rematch with Holland. Holland, injured himself, wasn't able to make it, so Dolidze coming in short notice. And Daukaus is actually going to be the minus 225 favorite here. Come back on Dolidze's plus 190, and I think this line actually opened pretty recently, and Daukaus was actually a minus 140 favorite. Got steamed up to minus 225 pretty quickly here. And I have a feeling this line will probably shorten up a little bit by the time this podcast comes out, because it does feel a little wide, but sorry. Let's take a look at Dolidze here first. So right off the bat, I do just want to say I'm not a huge fan of this guy. He's pretty low output, pretty boring fighter to watch overall. And it does have some power on the feet, does like to swing hard, but, again, he's just super low volume there. Doesn't really throw too much on the feet. And he is someone who can offensively grapple as well, but again, he isn't someone who's particularly active on the ground either. He will look for submissions, but, just not super aggressive there. He is someone who will generally prioritize control. And, just overall, very low output control based, decisionator. He does have a nice TKO over, I believe, Khadis Ibragimov, but up until that point, it was an extremely low output fight as well, until he just was able to time Khadis pretty well there and land the knockout. But outside of that, he hasn't really been in any good fights at all, honestly. But his opponent, Daukaus, pretty well-rounded fighter, a fighter I was pretty high on coming into the UFC, but it just looks like Daukaus hasn't really been able to put it all together. But as far as what Daukaus brings to the table, though, I'd say very well-rounded. He's got good crisp boxing. He's got pretty good hands, honestly. Doesn't use it as much as I'd like him to. He does seem a little tentative to throw offense on the feet, but when he does get his hands going, he is, I think, a pretty slick boxer. And he is someone who does have, I believe, his base isn't grappling. His takedown's not particularly great, but he does have good jiu-jitsu. He's got good scrambling ability. He's also got pretty good clinch work as well. So overall, very solid fighter. Just have yet to see him really put everything together at this point. But taking a look at this matchup, it's I'd say pretty intriguing. Very weird changeup for Daukaus here. Dolidze's a completely different matchup stylistically than Holland, and Daukaus is actually making a pretty quick turnaround. I know he didn't really take all that much damage in his most recent fight, and it's only been about a month, so I don't know how that's gonna affect Daukaus here. It does seem like a pretty quick turnaround, and he'll be going up against Dolidze, who, as much shit as I talked about him, Dolidze is, I'd say, a pretty effective fighter in the sense that, he's boring to watch, but he does have a tendency to be able to just slow fights down and stall fights out with his, control and, his strength and everything. So this is going to be, I think, a pretty difficult fight for Holland. But overall, I do favor Holland, or Daukaus, not Holland, my bad. I do favor Daukaus pretty much everywhere, a little bit more than Dolidze here. So I can kind of see why the line is the way it is, because, usually when you have a fighter that's just a little bit better everywhere, they'll just win a little more convincingly. But yeah, as far as like the striking, I do like the volume that Daukaus brings a lot more than Dolidze. I think he's the much more technical striker in there, the much more layered striker. Whereas Dolidze, he's, I think, a bit basic, a little reliant on just landing some power shots. And then, I do think that as far as like the offensive grappling, the jiu-jitsu, maybe not the jiu-jitsu, Dolidze does have solid jiu-jitsu, but maybe like the clinch work and stuff, I do favor Daukaus in there a little bit more. But, the way Dolidze fights, he's able to, kind of lower the output of opponents, because he's got big power and their opponents are a little more tentative to throw. And then, we have seen Dolidze just hold guys up against the cage, just, take opponents down and just lay on top of them. The guy's, a big time just control guy. And so, for that reason, I think it's going to be hard for Daukaus to really get much of his output going. So yeah, I do feel that there is a path to victory here for Dolidze. I not going to like it because it's going to be a pretty boring fight if he wins. But I do feel that he can win here. I don't know if I want to pick Dolidze, though, because, if Daukaus is able to separate and maybe work at distance for a minute or two, maybe even hit some offensive takedowns, I do think the judges will score that in favor of Daukaus, because they do favor like the volume and the output and the damage done, whereas Dolidze, he's gonna have to hold Holland down for like maybe at least 4 minutes around, because he's not really gonna do much damage to Daukaus, I think. So I think Daukaus is gonna be able to take this, even if he's in like even if he's being controlled for a lot of the round. We did see that with Dolidze, he did lose the decision to Giles there, even though that was a very, very slow-paced fight. But Giles just had a little flashier striking in there, had slightly bigger moments. So I also do want to mention Dolidze went to split decision with John Allen, which depending on how Allen looks against the short notice guy coming in. So depending on how Allen looks, I am gonna have to maybe reconsider this take. But I think at the time, going to split decision against Allen, not a great look for Dolidze. So I just don't think that Dolidze, unless he's able to get just an extreme amount of control time over Daukaus, is going to be able to win this. So I got to go with Daukaus. I think he wins via decision here. So I'm going to go with Daukaus. But moving along, we have Song Yadong versus Julio Arce, and Song's going to be the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Arce is plus 130, and this should be a banger of a fight. Two guys who I think are pretty good strikers in there. Both guys will throw down. Neither of these guys really like to go to the grappling, so this should be a pretty fun fight. Striker's delight here. So we'll start with Arce first. He's going to be this is going to be a second fight at 135 here. Looked pretty good against Ewell in his most recent fight, but like I said before, he's primarily a striker. He's got good quick hands in there, good counter punching, good combination striking as well. Very good timing. Just overall, I'd say a very solid offensive striker. He's got good takedown defense as well. Again, he looked fantastic against Ewell in his bantamweight debut. Was able to pretty much just consistently catch Ewell coming in, just land the much heavier shots, much cleaner shots in there, get the timing down. I was a little concerned that Arce might not be as quick coming down to 135, because the guy, I'd say, had pretty quick hands at 145, but he was a little undersized there. And at 135, I thought that maybe he might be a little slower, but that definitely wasn't the case against Ewell. So I do think that Arce, he could have a bit of success here at 135. However, he'll be up against Song Yadong, who I'd say is a pretty good striker himself at 135. Yadong, he's got pretty quick hands himself. He likes to blitz in the pocket, just unload combinations. Definitely looks like he's got a bit of zip in his shots. Very good offensive striker as well, but I do feel Song is a bit more one-dimensional with the striking than Arce. I think that Arce is a little more layered with his techniques, and defensively speaking, I do think that Yadong is a little more hittable than Arce. Arce, I think, is a much better counter striker. But overall, this is going to be, I think, a pretty tough matchup to call, because both guys are very good. Both guys bring something a little different to the table here. I do think that Song is going to be a bit quicker, a little more explosive, and I do think that Song is probably got the quicker hands in there as well. But overall, I just feel that Arce is probably the better striker. I think he's the much more diverse striker, and I do think he's a little more layered in there. We did see in Song's fight against Phillips was able to get the timing on Song, basically just touch him up every time he entered the pocket here. And I feel that Arce might actually be able to do the same here. Arce, I did say earlier against Ewell that he looked like he might still have, some of the speed here, but, against someone like Song, who I think is much quicker than Ewell, Arce might struggle a little bit. We might actually see Song maybe beat Arce to the punch here, but, I'm not 100% certain about that. Phillips, I was wrong about the Phillips read. I thought Song would be able to beat Phillips to the punch as well, but Phillips was able to see everything coming, and Arce might be able to do the same. But on the other hand, Arce is, I think, a little older in there, so, it's going to be really hard to get a great read on some of these striking exchanges. Like Song, he definitely does overextend sometimes. He is a little over aggressive and can just walk into punches. But I feel that maybe that fight against Phillips could have been a learning experience, and he may have added a few more layers to his striking. You maybe work his feints a little more, work some of the kicks a little bit more as well, instead of just blitzing in and kind of telegraphing some of his entries. So that could be a learning experience, but again, I just don't really know if Song's going to be making those improvements because, if I'm being honest, he hasn't really shown too much improvement since he's joined the UFC. And honestly, I don't think that Team Alpha Male is that good of a camp. They're pretty mediocre, honestly. And I think they're kind of just bros there, honestly. Just, we see guys like Garbrandt and Song who are, really good athletically, guys who I think have really good potential, kind of just fizzle out a little bit. And, I do still think that they're good fighters, but they just haven't really added much depth to their game. They're coming in there just doing the same shit every single fight. So I don't want to completely bank on Song making these improvements coming into this fight, but, I do feel he's for sure got the youth and maybe the athleticism advantage here. And just, I think small tweaks to his game could definitely help him out a lot. But, if he hasn't really made improvements, if he's coming in, the same fighter he always has, I do think he's got a decent chance here. I do feel it's a pretty 50-50 fight, though. I feel that Arce is a little overlooked in this spot. He's not that big of a dog, but I do feel that he's got a pretty good shot of coming out ahead in these striking exchanges. I might still go with Song here just because I do think that, he's going to be landing some of the heavier shots. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again for this podcast. I do think that the way that Song strikes, I think is, I think it scores well with the judges. I think it looks good aesthetically. And then on top of that, he does hit pretty hard. He's got, very, very quick hands in there, very good combination striking, good crisp striking. So, assuming they come out like relatively even on these striking exchanges, I do think that the judges might score it in Song's favor. But, I can't argue with anyone who takes the shot on Arce here. I do think that this is a bit of a 50-50 fight. So, I could see Arce being the value side, but I am going to go with Song here. I'm going to go with the younger guy with a little more explosive striking. So I'll take Song to win via decision, maybe a 29-28 decision here. And in the next fight, we have Felicia Spencer versus Leah Letson. And Spencer is the minus 330 favorite. Come back on Letson is plus 255. So we'll start with the UFC newcomer in Letson. So yeah, she's making her UFC debut. She's 5-1. Definitely still does look super green in there. She is someone who will move forward and throw volume. And she definitely does seem like she has a bit of power in her shots. But on the other side of things, Letson is someone who is pretty hittable. I mean, she's getting cracked quite a bit on the regionals. That said, though, the tape is from a little while ago, and Letson is coming off of a pretty long layoff. There's fights of her from back in 2014, and then, there's her most recent fight, honestly, is in 2018, and you do see some improvements in her striking a little bit. It's definitely a bit sharper, a bit tighter, but she's still kind of hittable in both of those fights. So I don't know how much improvement she's really made since then, but from what I've seen, she does just look like a pretty basic, one-dimensional striker who will move forward and who will just chuck bombs in there. Haven't seen much of her defensive grappling, which I do think is going to be what's going to keep me off of this fight, honestly. Felicia Spencer is, I think, a pretty good grappler here. Her striking isn't great. I think on the feet it might actually be pretty even for, despite how hittable Letson is. I really don't think Spencer's that good of a striker. It could play out pretty close on the feet. But where I do think Spencer will have a pretty big advantage is going to be the grappling. Spencer, she's a little slow in there, but, she is someone who can hit takedowns, look for sweeps, look for trips. And once she's on top, she's actually pretty good at advancing positions. She does do a decent job of staying busy there, and, she will look for submissions as well. And so that's going to be, I think, a pretty big factor here going into this fight. We don't know how good Letson is on the ground. And, if her grappling defense is as bad as her striking defense, this could be a quick fight. We could see Spencer just snatch up a submission pretty early here. But on the other hand, if Letson does have decent takedown defense, decent submission defense, and, she is able to keep this fight standing, I could see it playing out pretty close. That said, though, I do still have to side with Spencer. At least Spencer's, she's fought, UFC caliber opponents, which honestly doesn't really mean much at 145. But, at least she's fought, I'd say more named opponents. Whereas with Letson, she's fought a ton of regional bums, honestly, and hasn't particularly looked great. Like, she's taken a decent amount of damage against someone like Stolyarenko, who, pretty low level. So, Letson may have leveled up since then. It's been like nearly 3 years now. So, she could just look a lot better. And, if she is able to keep this fight standing, I guess she could make it competitive. But I don't know if I really want to bank on that happening. So, for that reason, I am going to pick Spencer here to win. I think she should get it done with her grappling. Even if she isn't able to find the submission here, I think Spencer should be able to hit some takedowns, get a bit of control time, and, win, I'd say, pretty comfortably on the cards here. But, very little confidence in Spencer, if I'm being honest. I'd say most of these 145ers are all pretty low level, honestly. I don't think the skill gap between any of them's particularly great, which is why I was kind of shocked when Spencer opened as like a minus like 250 favorite or something against her last opponent. What's her name? She was just headlining. It's just a second here. Yeah, against Norma Dumont. That was a little ridiculous, but yeah, I just don't think that anyone's like leagues above anyone else at this division outside of Nunez. But yeah, so I'll go with Spencer here. She's a little more proven. But yeah, I don't think I'll touch this fight at all from a betting perspective. And moving along, we have another heavyweight fight here. Ben Rothwell versus Marcos Rogério de Lima. And Rothwell's the minus 153 favorite. Come back on Rogério de Lima is plus 133. And we'll take a look here at Rothwell first. So, Rothwell, primarily a striker. Very awkward striking style, honestly. He likes to back opponents down against the cage, just look to unload on him. He's got decent clinch work, does like to put his weight on his opponents, look to dirty box with them a bit. He is someone, who does have, I think, pretty decent grappling, even though I don't think he uses it quite that much. It's got a nice front choke game, but, again, he kind of just prefers to stand and bang. We did see him go to it a little bit in his most recent fight against Barnett, where I do feel Ben had a pretty sizable size and skill advantage. So I think he was able to utilize that a bit. And then, a little while ago, he did used to go to the chokes quite a bit. But as of late, he's just primarily been a striker. His opponent, De Lima, also I consider him more of a striker as well. Again, someone who does have a bit of grappling in there, but, does prefer to stand and just chuck bombs in there. Honestly, I find De Lima to be a bit more limited than Big Ben. On the feet, De Lima is pretty explosive. He's got some very heavy low leg kicks. We'll look to just wing big overhands as well. But generally, De Lima is pretty low volume. He can hit offensive takedowns, but, most of them are against pretty low level guys. And, De Lima is a bit of a gasser, honestly. He's known to slow down in fights, and his defensive grappling is pretty bad, which kind of makes it even worse since, slow down, he gets taken down and then pretty much gets choked out. And, 5 out of his 6 losses in the UFC are via submission. So a little bit concerning there, especially since De Lima is kind of undersized for the division. The guy is more of a natural light heavyweight, kind of just bloated up in his fighting at heavyweight now. So for that reason, I definitely do have to side with Ben here. I got to side with the guy who's a more natural heavyweight. And, on top of that, Ben's actually fought better opponents in there, whereas De Lima, I think he's basically only beaten bums. And, I don't think he's really been in there with really that good of fighters to begin with. Whereas, with Ben, he's beaten decent guys. And, he's actually been in there with, very high-level guys as well. And then on top of that, even though I feel Big Ben doesn't really go to the wrestling and grappling as much, I do think that he can definitely go there for this, especially as the fight starts to drag on, as De Lima starts to slow down. He could definitely, find the takedowns a little bit easier, maybe even get the submission on De Lima, because, we did see Big Ben go to his grappling a little bit in his most recent fight. Granted, I think that Barnett is probably much lower level when it comes to the defensive grappling, but once De Lima gasses, pretty much all bets are off. So there's just no way I'm going to take De Lima in this spot here. I think the size, the pressure, and the pace to an extent is gonna be able to do enough to really break De Lima in this situation. I think Ben I honestly think Big Ben's got better striking here. DeLima, outside of landing just a crazy like overhand or something, I don't know if he's going to be able to put Big Ben out. I do think the leg kicks are probably going to wear on Rothwell a little bit, but I feel that if things get dicey, I think Big Ben can probably just close the distance, look to clinch up with DeLima, really put his weight on him, and just make DeLima work in there. And I do think that eventually DeLima is going to slow down to the point where I think Big Ben could maybe take him down, find a submission. But I do think that going into rounds 2 and 3, I do think Rothwell should be able to take this. I am tempted to actually bet Rothwell here. The only issue is the guy is pretty old. He's 40 years old, which, I know at heavyweight people don't consider it all that old, but, it's still, quite old. And he's got a ton of fight miles on him. So, I do think that's exacerbated a little bit here. And, and Big Ben just honestly hasn't looked particularly great either. So, I like Rothwell to win here, but I just don't know if I want to take the shot. Minus 150 is not too ridiculous of a price. I do think that outside of DeLima landing a big bomb on him, I think Rothwell should win this. So I haven't placed a bet on him yet, but I might sit on this a little bit, see where the line goes. I might take Rothwell to win via decision if the price is good enough. Might even sprinkle a little bit of the submission prop, because I do think that if DeLima slows down enough, Rothwell might actually find the choke. So I don't know. I might just play the money line and sprinkle a little bit on the sub prop, but we'll see where the line goes. But as far as an official pick goes, I will go with Rothwell to win the round 3 submission. We'll go with that. And in the main event, we have Max Holloway versus Yair Rodriguez. And Holloway is going to be the minus 600 favorite, come back on. Rodriguez is plus 400. And, we are getting the return of Rodriguez, but we're also getting the return of Max Holloway. It's crazy to think that it's been nearly a year since that clinic that Holloway put on Kattar. And even crazier to think that both of these guys are coming back at around the same time. Kattar, I think, going to be back in about 2 months, fighting in January. But talking about returns, we're getting the return of Yair Rodriguez, who has been out of the game for a bit over 2 years now. And this is just such a tough fight for him to come back to. And Yair is a decent prospect, in my opinion. I do think he's a pretty exciting fighter. He's got good striking in there. He likes to throw a lot of those spinning attacks, some pretty low percentage moves, but, very fun to watch. He is someone who will load up big on his strikes, really just looking to take your head off with everything he throws. And yeah, just someone who's a lot of fun to watch, but, he is someone who can get a little reckless in there, can get a little hittable, and he is someone who does slow down in fights as well. And him taking this long of a layoff is a little concerning, because we really don't know how he's going to look after, such an extended time off. He is still very young in his career, so, we could see some pretty big improvements, but it's just really hard to quantify that. And, he'll be going up against Max Holloway, easily, top 2 fighter in the division. Him and Volkanovski, I think, are head and shoulders above everyone else so far. But yeah, I mean, we saw what Holloway was able to do to someone, a lesser striker like Kattar, who, I'd actually backed going into that fight. I thought Kattar would make it a lot closer, Kattar having really good boxing in there, but, Holloway basically just tooled Kattar in there. Extremely lopsided fight. I didn't think that after the Ortega performance, Holloway would be able to top that, wouldn't be able to dominate someone like he did. And then he goes and just puts on an absolute clinic on Kattar. Really just makes you respect the Volkanovski performance in there. But going back to Max here, the guy's an absolute cardio machine. He's able to just nonstop pressure opponents. The pace is absolutely torrid in there. He could do it for 5 hard rounds, and he's a very good technical offensive striker as well. So he's not just going in there, just fighting recklessly. But he is a little hittable. But again, with the amount of volume that he throws, of course he's going to leave some openings. But the amount of damage that he's able to dish out is just completely unbalanced in there. Like, yeah, he is hittable, but the damage that he's outputting is also pretty crazy as well. And on top of that, the guy's got a legendary chin in there. I don't think he's ever really been he's never been dropped officially. He did get hurt and wobbled by Poirier a little bit, but that's up a weight class, and technically he wasn't ever really dropped in that fight. He did have the fence to fall back on, I think, in a couple moments, but overall, he's had just an absolutely legendary chin. Cast iron, you can't really hurt the guy. And, it is a little concern, the amount of damage he's taken. He's definitely taken his fair share of damage, and you just never know when it's going to crack in there. But, until I've seen him actually get dropped and hurt, I'm just going to assume his chin's going to hold up until then. So, yeah, this is an extremely tough matchup for Rodriguez. Coming off of a long layoff, he's definitely, I think, going to be a little rusty. And, you don't want to start slow against Holloway in there, because once he starts building a bit of momentum, the guy just does not stop, and the damage just keeps accumulating in there. So Rodriguez is he can't start slow in this fight. He's gonna have to make Holloway respect him early. Otherwise Holloway's just gonna steamroll him, and I have a feeling that is gonna happen here. The line's kind of indicative of that. I do feel maybe there's a little bit of recency bias. We see Holloway just absolutely steamroll Kattar in there, one of the better strikers. And so I guess the hype is a bit warranted, although I don't think we've ever seen Holloway as this big of a favorite. And to make a point for Rodriguez here, or to make a case for Rodriguez here, I do think that Rodriguez is a pretty dangerous striker. And, he could definitely catch Holloway, but what it comes down to is really just a puncher's chance for Holloway, or for Kattar, for Rodriguez. Damn, I'm stumbling. But I do think that Rodriguez has really just got a puncher's chance. He's going to have to land some crazy spinning heel kick or something. And, as good as Holloway's chin is, if, you eat a head kick like that, you're probably going to get put out. But outside of that, I just don't see Rodriguez having too much success there. Maybe some of the light kicks we saw Volkanovski have success there, and Rodriguez does have a pretty good kicking game. Maybe he could try and limit the mobility of Holloway a little bit there, but Holloway has shown that he can adapt to it a little bit. He did a decent job kind of checking the kicks a little bit better the second time, but I think what Holloway did best in that fight was just answer those kicks with kicks of his own. But, I think what it really comes down to is just the pressure and pace of Holloway. Rodriguez, he is someone who will slow down, and Rodriguez is pretty hittable himself. So, I think come like the second, third rounds, we're going to see Holloway really start to pour it on Rodriguez, and he's really going to start to pull away. Like, I think Rodriguez can probably keep the first two rounds competitive. He is a pretty heavy hitter, and he is a good striker in his own right. So maybe those first couple of rounds he could do a bit of damage. But if he isn't able to get Holloway out of there, if he's not able to do some fight changing damage early in that fight, I think Holloway's just gonna pull away in the latter rounds. Rodriguez, cardio not exactly the best, especially with how heavy he sits down on some of those shots. He was slowing down a little bit against the zombie before landing that spinning back fist, which, a lot of people saying that Rodriguez was getting just dominated that fight. I felt it was actually a pretty close fight. It was pretty competitive. I don't think that zombie was like destroying Rodriguez in there, but, I do think that he would have lost, should it have gone to a decision. But of course, Rodriguez was able to pull off that spinning back fist. That said, I really don't think he's going to be able to pull something like that off against Holloway. And so, if that doesn't happen, I think Holloway is going to just be able to just pull away later, honestly. So, I'm going to go with Holloway here. I think he can win a pretty dominant decision, maybe even get like a late round stoppage. So, I'll take Holloway here.